Hello. Today I'm here to talk to you about intimate partner violence. What is it? How do we know what it is? What is its prevalence in our society? How can we assess for it? What are we to look for? What are the important things to look for when intimate partner violence is occurring? And ultimately, what do we do with that? So today I'm going to just read out the definition from the UN because it encapsulates the best definition of what intimate partner violence is. So they say it is any behavior, so it's a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. This behavior or abuse can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological actions or threats of actions that influence another person. This includes any behaviors that frighten, intimidate, terrorize, manipulate, hurt, humiliate, blame, injure, or wound someone. Domestic violence can happen to anyone of any age, race, sexual orientation, religion, or gender. It can occur within a range of relationships, including couples that are married, living together, or dating. And domestic violence affects people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and education levels. The prevalence that we see of intimate partner violence occurring in Canada is extremely high. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence at some point in their life. That statistic goes up for the younger generation. So women ages 15 to 24 will experience domestic violence as high as 1 in 3. The other, within that range and that demographic of women that experience this, other vulnerable demographics are also Indigenous women, where 61% of them will experience domestic violence. Women living in rural areas, it doubles. Women are twice as likely to be in an intimate partner relationship in a rural area over an urban area. Disabled women will experience high levels of abuse. Visibly minority women also experience incredible degrees of violence, and LGBTQ women. Another demographic that is really high in the prevalence of domestic violence is not women, but homosexual men. They have a 31% chance of living in a relationship with domestic violence over the 17% of heterosexual relationships. This we keep in mind just to look at the demographics to see who might be affected, who might be in a relationship that is full of abuse. And also the prevalence is to understand that we can keep our eyes open for these certain demographics, and lots of work needs to be done in these areas. Within this prevalence, the highest case of reported incidences of abuse are psychological. So this can happen through talking down to a person, making fun of them, belittling them. This can be in all areas of like financial and spiritual abuse. This is a way to control and manipulate a person so that they don't leave the relationship and do whatever that person says. The second highest prevalence of the form of abuse is physical. Obviously, violent acts towards others to intimidate them, to create that fear of them, to maintain control and power over the other. And then the third most common prevalence is sexual. And so, yeah. Why this is important to talk about is that the highest numbers of women who been murdered, the highest numbers are by intimate partners. So intimate partner violence can lead to intimate partner homicide, where men typically the highest numbers or the cause of homicides in Canada are through criminal activity, where women it's through death by an intimate partner. So there's lots of reasons to get involved. Ways and different effects that intimate partner violence has on the health of the individual going through the abuse is, you would think sometimes the physical, like being hurt or being beaten, will be the most, but really we see this affecting all aspects of women's life and health. Many women report having high levels of like physical problems, like heart issues, digestive issues, headaches, memory loss, all of that. It can also affect their sexual life, where there's a loss of interest in having sex, really low self-esteem, and just perspective of self. It can affect reproductive health, as women often are, interestingly enough, abuse often escalates when women are pregnant, which puts them in a higher risk of losing or having a early or preterm baby, or losing the baby and having miscarriage. Also, if there's a high level of distress within the home at a constant rate, women are less likely to conceive and have babies due to the distress that they are experiencing. And then the greatest impact is on mental health problems. Women who are in intimate partner violent relationships have a high comorbidity of depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol abuse, and also display PTSD symptoms. Like I said, the motivation for abuse is to control and have power over the other. There's lots of different types of abuse that women have incurred, and this can be through psychological abuse, which there's a lot of research that supports that psychological abuse has higher levels of damage done to women who are in those relationships, and that it can often lead to physical abuse later on as the relationship progresses. Physical and threat of physical is a high rate of what happens within these relationships, but verbal abuse, sexual, spiritual, using their religious frameworks to enhance that control and power over the other, use scriptures against women for denying, like having the justification to deny their rights and their freedoms, using it to make them feel guilty or that they have to suppress their own emotional state. There's lots of social abuse that can happen, where the abuser will withhold a friend group or family. They'll start isolating the individual. Cultural abuses, emotional, intellectual, and financial. Financial can be a really devastating one, because many women have shared about that they went to go pay for their gas and they had no money in their account, and they were at the mercy of this person who's trying to control, empower, and overpower them. And that financial abuse can also be a reason why women won't leave, because they won't have access to finances. They'll have denial to their children. They'll lose their children, their home, the safety network in which they live. Their whole livelihood could be taken from them, and is often threatened to be taken away if they stand up or if they leave. And so these types of abuses are serious and have huge impacts on those that are trapped in those relationships. A big understanding about when there is violence involved is what kind of violence, in order to help and support those that are in those relationships. There's only one type of defined violence that seems to be appropriate for couples therapy, but also appropriate for couples to stay together and to work through, and that's situational couple violence. In this type of relationship, the biggest issues or the biggest problems are mostly communication skills and emotion regulation. And so helping these types of couples who kind of are explosive, their fights get out of control. They kind of just blow up at each other and don't know how to communicate in a way that isn't full of aggression, and that there's minor violence, like things being thrown at each other, or they're just super angry and slamming doors or slamming down pots and pans. In these relationships, the partners do not feel like they are afraid or controlled by the other. And so it is really just about helping them regulate their emotions, develop healthy communication styles, and really learning how to de-escalate when crisis or conflicts arise. But then there's these other forms of violence which are not recommended for couples work and really have to be taken extremely seriously in regards to how to move forward when this is identified within a relationship. The most destructive is called intimate terrorism. This is where there's a high level of coercive control. There's a power imbalance. The one controls the other through forms of intimidation and fear. The motivation for the relationship is just about control. There's frequent and severe acts of violence, whether they're physical, psychological, financial, emotional, spiritual, it doesn't matter. It just means that they're very intense and extremely controlling. There's sometimes evidence that women have created, like they fight back, but it's often through forms of self-defense and just out of sheer frustration, trying to get out of the weight and restriction of the control by their partner. When this type of violence is happening within a relationship, there's a higher chance and a more likely chance that the partner could kill the other partner. So it's a very serious act. Violent resistance is just simply about the person who's in the controlled side, so they're controlled by the partner. They resist through violence. They push back, they fight back. They're just trying to get away in whatever means that they can. And then the third type of violence is mutual violent control. This is explosive because both partners are the controller. Both partners are battling for control. You would imagine the scene of mutual combat. Like they are both digging in their heels. They are both equally dysregulated and dysfunctional and not working towards a healthy relationship, but trying to control each other. Even though it's mutual, there is obviously power discrepancies because men are typically stronger and bigger than women, and so women still tend to be harmed more in these kind of relationships. But in these kind of relationships, it can be mutual, it can be extremely destructive, and couples therapy and working together in this kind of relationship is not recommended. So when we look at these kind of relationships, the thing that we have to look for and be aware of, especially within our communities, is looking at, do the unhealthy relationships that we're around or we are possibly in, are they dangerous? Are they, defined by control and manipulation? Looking at the cycle of abuse from When Love Hurts, which this is a huge resource, and I would recommend anyone who even thinks that they're in an abusive relationship, or knows someone who possibly could be. Read this. It will give you incredible insight and wisdom, and really practical advice on what does an abusive relationship look like, and then how do you get out, how do you know when to get out. And basically they define the cycle of abuse as the honeymoon stage, the tension building phase, and the explosive phase. These phases don't have to happen in sequence. They often do, but there's always, outliers and exceptions to the rules. But identifying the cycle of these phases is really important. Many relationships experience conflict, experience, poor communication, fights, misunderstandings. But the signature theme for an abusive relationship is that there is a power imbalance, that one is trying to control and overpower the other, and uses every resource in their life and around them to maintain that power and control. In normal relationships, we might fight, we might disagree, we could have explosive responses to each other, but there's not this level of fear and intimidation or awareness that I'm afraid of the other. If someone is in a relationship where they feel that constant fear of the other, that they feel like they walk on eggshells all the time, and even in the honeymoon stage, that is usually things are going well, the partner is attentive and considerate towards the needs of their other partner, there's still this lurking fear that when is it going to change, what's going to happen, and then what do I do? There's this mistrust, or even within the honeymoon stage could be a bit of it creates this distrust with themselves, that the person who's being abused might be thinking, oh, but this person is great. This is who I fell in love with at the beginning. This reminds me of what it was at the beginning, and maybe I did it wrong. And that's the other key note is, does the person who's being controlled or abused feel like they're at fault for the behavior of their partner? In the tension building stage, it's often defined as the person becomes sullen or withdrawn. They can start becoming moody and kind of irritable, but there's a pulling away and kind of a quieting of the person who is the abuser. This can cause a lot of fear and confusion in the person who's living with that person, because the withdrawal and not knowing when they're coming back, you feel almost anxious. You want to attend to them and make sure that they're okay. And oftentimes when there's a lot of attention drawn towards the person withdrawing, it's followed by an explosion, which leads into the explosive phase. That could be minutes, hours, weeks. It doesn't there's no defined time, but that's often when the abuse really hits its climax and violence can occur. And then the blame of, you pushed me too hard. Why didn't you just leave me alone? I told you I was fine. And so there's blame put on the person who's being abused. And then this is often followed by a lot of, the apologies come, the trying to make it right comes in, and we're back into that honeymoon stage. So you can see how these cycles kind of fall into each other. The honeymoon stage can last for a while. Often the tension building stage is the longest, and that can be over a day, weeks, months, and it can cause so much distress within the person who's living with someone who is, that tension is building within them. And then the explosive phase can be pretty devastating and life-changing for many. And so identifying the cycle of abuse and who it's affecting is really crucial. Anytime we're considering or seeing or working with couples where there's children in the home and there's any evidence of violence happening, we do have to consider what the best action is for this family, and to keep a watchful eye. Support and having the community around and involved in couples who are struggling with this is really crucial to helping break some of the cycles of abuse, to bring support to the victim in this. Often people say to women who are in these kind of relationships, why don't you leave? And it kind of is heartbreaking, because who's asking these men, why do you abuse? Why do you think this is okay? And so supporting women rather than judging or putting them down or questioning them is the way that we will support these kind of families and these types of relationships to stop happening. If people feel supported and have just that community awareness and accountability, they're more likely to leave the relationship, to get out of the abuse, and have the opportunity to live beyond that and to start to heal and grow. There's lots of ways that we can support men who are struggling with this, or people who are just caught in these abusive patterns. And so reaching out to your local counselors and community resources to help people support them in their journey of healing and recovery is really important. But mostly coming alongside the victims and children who are in these homes to bring just safety and a chance to live without the fear of being abused ever again. All right. Thank you.